go back to having a meeting with pants on.
All right, well, good evening all. Welcome to the meeting of the Kennebunkport Growth Planning Committee. We are back live, albeit masked up to protect each and every one of us. We'll start off as normal with our introduction of members and guests. So, Werner,
Werner Gilliam?
James McMahon.
Dan Saunders,
Jim Fitzgerald. Paul Hogan.
Janet Powell.
Right. Hi, Ann. Tom Morgan. And, all right, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. All right, so first thing on our agenda is first thing on the agenda is for me to thank this crew because I was not able to attend last Monday. I got held in work, so I spent the last 2 weeks in Texas.
James McMahon.
And I'd like to thank them for the work
Jim
they did. I
Fitzgerald,
understand it was
Paul
a
Hogan.
great evening.
Janet
A
Powell.
lot of good communication with the people that were participating. Over 60 residents joined us. And we're going to have a report out on that input. So thank you all for your work that night. Thank you. I'll turn over to one of you two, Liz or Tom, to kind of give us a report.
It doesn't seem like it's on.
Doesn't have batteries in it, not. I put batteries in it.
Yeah, I thought it was, I don't know, kind of far from the mic. Can you guys hear me okay?
No.
Just take it off the stand.
Yeah, all right, that's even better idea.
There you go.
I like that. Let me go sit out here again. Yeah, I was impressed with the turnout and the kind of discussions that took place. People seemed really engaged. We got some photographs to record the event. It's on a Flickr site. I don't know how many of you guys got the link. The link's right on the project website. We'll make sure you get it. You guys are all very photogenic, by the way. But it's a fabulous setting. And you probably recall each table had worksheets. We had 3 different sessions. And the discussions were tossed around on each table, about 6, 7 people in each table. And they were putting their comments and conclusions and observations down on the worksheets. Liz and I took that information and we compiled it and transcribed it and turned it into a big list. It's 14 pages long. I think you all saw that over email. I have a few extra copies too here if anybody likes a paper copy. Guys, yeah. So what this is the comments that were made at the session by Kennebunkport residents. And our next step after that was we used that input and those comments to try to form the basis of a very important chapter in the comp plan, and that's called the vision plan chapter. And that's kind of like, okay, what do we aspire to? What do we envision the community being like in 2030? Well, not what we think it might be, but what we want it to be, where we want to go. I mean, the rest of the plan is how do you get there. But this is kind of a critical chapter because we only had a week to put that together because we didn't start it until we heard from the townspeople. I just got it out to you this afternoon. I don't know if you had a chance to have a look at it, but there's paper copies in front of you. Now, because you've had no time to review it, it's up to you today whether you want to spend any time tonight kicking around and talking about it, or we could just, spend more time 2 weeks from tonight, or probably both.
You guys had an opportunity to read this?
No, we just
Just
got it.
quickly. Just quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
skimmed it this afternoon.
We had a week to put that together. We didn't start it until we heard from the townspeople.
Well, maybe we just takes 5 minutes, only a couple pages, take 5 minutes, just kind of read through it. Seem reasonable, we're here, so only take 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's up to you guys. That'd be fine. We're ready for that.
Okay.
But of course, because it's such a critical component of the plan, we want to make sure you have the next 2 weeks to digest it and think about it.
Absolutely.
And come back and then, okay, let's
Absolutely. I
think about
agree,
this before we,
I was thinking maybe go through here, at least if
Yeah.
we've got some
No.
immediate questions, we can.
that'll be good. Questions and say, hey, what's this? This doesn't belong here or whatever, or this is great, tell us more. Liz, is there anything you wanted to add about the SWOT before we go into that?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, that's up to you guys.
Were you folks here tonight at the
Of
workshop
course, because it's such a
last
critical-
week? You weren't, okay. Great, well, thank you. So
come back and
Tom gave a short update about sort of what the activity was, but we had about 58 people, I think, on our sign-in sheet, and that doesn't include
say, hey, what's
the growth planning committee members and Werner. So over 60 people attended, and we had groups participate in 3 different sessions, and each session was focused on a different topic, and we tried to get most participants at the workshop to sit at one of our tables that were designated for a discussion on the vision chapter. And we got a lot of great input, which you can see in the orange writing there, and have been using that to incorporate into, as Tom mentioned, the vision chapter. I can pull up one slide really quickly before we dive into the vision chapter, just to show you. Our setting for our workshop, which was really nice. We got a lot of great pictures. Tom's pictures are better than this one. This was one that I had, but he's the photographer. And then this is a photo of our sticky dot poll, which we asked people to put 5 dots in the boxes that they thought best reflected how they would like the community to be in 2030. So we have the results of that poster in a pie chart form, and we'll be incorporating that into our summary and documentation of the public input. Setting for our workshop, which was really nice.
Just a question, I know the vision statement is based upon not only last week, but going back to the community survey and the short-term surveys.
And all the way back to 2018.
And all the way back to
you guys
2018.
Survey then, too.
So, and obviously you've been thinking about that for some time and have come up with this based upon the new input as well as
Yes.
the old input. Are the other information sources going to be documented as well? You know, the other surveys, the community surveys, so.
Yeah. They are documented and they're on the project website. All
I
of
mean,
them are. Yeah.
I can see they're in here,
Yeah.
in reading the text. I can, you know, I see it. The support for it is what I'm sort of asking about.
Oh, yeah. Well, this, some of it, you know, this is the summary from the session last week, the SWAT. These are the comments made by the citizens.
Right.
So you can look at the verbatim comments and you can tie a straight line from that to the vision statement. For example, you know, one topic that I don't recall the committee discussing, and I didn't, or Liz, was ecotourism. And that came up several times in last week at the session. So that came from the townspeople. And I'm looking at it and say, you know, I hadn't thought of that, but that's, the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. You know, so. Oh, yeah. Well, this,
One of the requirements for the comprehensive plan is to document how public input was collected and how it was used to compile or to inform the plan. And so we'll have documentation of all of the different public input that we've received in sort of a consistent format. We have a report up similar to this for a Christmas Prelude event that I think we shared with the committee. Currently, we have our mini survey information in PowerPoint and sort of PDF format, so we'll be getting that in a slightly more consistent format so that we can include all of that in the appendices to the plan. So you'll be able to see the verbatim comments and the raw data from the surveys if you, you know, if you're interested in that at the end of the plan. Sort of a consistent format. We have a report.
What I found really interesting the other night was that the first round, they played by the rules. You know, about 6 people to a table, and they were kind of doing their business. When they got to the second round, they doubled in size. It was like 12 people at a table, and they were really going at it. And then the third round was like 15 or 20 people in around big tables. So it was really encouraging to see that kind of input. hooray for our residents. What I found really interesting.
So I did get there were a
was
couple people that approached me
At the first round,
after,
they played by the rules.
or a couple days
about
after.
6 people to a table,
They definitely,
and They were,
people that were there and then other people that
When they
I've
got to the
subsequently
second
heard
round,
about it,
they doubled the size.
were very encouraged and they
It was like
definitely
12
wanted to
people at a
participate.
table.
There was a little
And they were
discouragement
really
and
going at
it's
it.
really nothing that
And
we
then the
could do.
third
It's,
round
you know,
was like
the
15
size
or
that
20
we had,
people
they were kind of
and-
disappointed, I
around
think,
big
that
tables. So
it filled
it
up
was
the registration.
really encouraging.
So they, you know, they
to
didn't
see
have
that
an
kind of
opportunity
input.
to participate, you know, they were discouraged because of
Hooray
that
for our
registration.
residents.
So it's worthy of keeping in mind, you know, all I said is I'll pass that on. What we do with that is really up to the group and what we have the means of doing. But I think there is definitely a larger base that wanted to contribute or additionally wants to contribute, you know, on some of on the matter. So, you know, that's all I said. I just pass it on and convey it to you, so.
Yeah, that's good feedback. We did our best to let people that contacted us know that we anticipated being able to accommodate walk-ins, and we did add those extra tables in, so, I think that everyone that showed up, there was, you know, there's ample space. You know, we were ready for, quite a few more people. But I think that, I can definitely understand if people were frustrated if they attempted to register and then found that, you know, already 70 people had already registered.
And I don't know if anybody said it, but thanks to the Nonantum for definitely offering that, you know, venue to make that really happen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we would like to thank Nonantum for that, from the GPC and Tom and Liz. It's a great setting for that type of event. It shows some of the highlights that Kennebunkport offers. So quiet, peaceful, good place to clear the mind and think about the opportunities for our town.
Yes, I definitely passed our thanks along
Yeah,
to
yeah.
the Nonantum, yes.
All right, so why don't we take a couple minutes just to kind of go through this and
Given COVID and Delta now, and, you know, public gatherings becoming more challenging, and, you know, some people aren't gonna wanna go out, and go into a closed room. Is there a way, like, to, like, take this document and do a Survey Monkey kind of thing? Like, you know, with these individual statements and ask for people's comments, feedback, suggestions, reactions, you know, sending to whatever lists, you know, townwide lists would be the broadest, other than just the people who attended. I mean, I think it would be, this came from the group in part, so they might want to comment on it. But, I mean, I don't want another, you know, if you get another 15 pages of all sorts of comments, it's very difficult to synthesize that. But there, you know, it would be interesting to know whether you, even if you just had agree, disagree, strongly agree kind of thing, and not have room for comments.
Well, getting the draft out to the townspeople is fairly straightforward. We just email it to them. We have a pretty good list right now. In terms of their response, I think this type of thing would be, wouldn't work too well with a yes, no, or maybe. I think it would
No,
just-
that's why as I was talking
we'd have to
through.
say,
Yeah.
here's what here's a draft, this is what we're thinking about. Do you have any comments, you know?
Okay.
Just leave it open-ended, you know?
yeah, I think so.
But wouldn't it be easier just to do, now that I'm thinking about it, if there's 15 of these, 15 questions with strongly agree is 5 and disagree is,
Yeah, we could do that, but that doesn't, you know, if I got a question like that,
yeah,
you know, and I say, well, there's one little thing I don't like about it, but you can't really convey that with that type of answer. That's why I think open-ended is like, okay, this is what we're thinking of, do you have any response, you know? Here's a draft, this is what we're thinking about.
It would be hard to know what people do or don't like about
Right.
each statement. Like, someone may feel like a statement's not strong enough, and someone else may feel
Yeah,
like
good
they
point.
want something to be stronger, and we wouldn't know why they agree or disagree, and it may be very difficult to sort of sift through even open-ended responses on a survey with, you know, this amount of information. I
Mhm.
think it could be fairly overwhelming. I think ultimately getting a consensus around the statements would be great, and that probably is best achieved in an in-person setting.
Mhm.
But I think, as Tom mentioned, we certainly are open to, you know, written comments too. We could bring them to the meeting and discuss them, you know, in a public meeting.
No, I would think we should review it here, ask any particular questions on this,
Mhm.
then take it home in the next 2 weeks, digest it. At our next meeting, kind of formalize, make any changes, and then have that sort of say, okay, this is what we think based on all the information we received, the feedback. How the town wants to go forward, and then maybe we can do, you know, put it out there and have a place where folks can say, hey, I agree with this, or, you know, I don't like the piece on tourism, or whatever it might be, and provide some feedback.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question on the term in housing on the use of the word gentrification. I tend to think of that term as a city term when, you know, people come in and displace the urban dwellers who have been there before, and I've never really thought of it in the context of, you know, a more rural community, and whether it's commonly used, whether the acceptance of that term is, you know, more widely thought of than what my narrow little vision of it is.
You're right, Paul. Historically, it was almost always used in an urban setting. But what it means is people with money coming in and buying housing, and the people who are already there with less money get pushed out. I heard that was definitely came up at the SWAT session last
Oh,
week.
sure.
Yeah. And you know, it was the pandemic kind of triggered that all across the United States. When people started working from home, suddenly these people were pouring out of the city. They made good money, and suddenly they didn't have to go to the office anymore. They could move to some place like Maine, you know, and buy pretty much anything they wanted. Well, it's okay so long as you keep building houses, but you know, if the demand exceeds the supply, the people with less money are going to get pushed out. And that's, you know, what I heard is that that's a fear among some people in town, you know, and rightfully so.
Saying it that way, I don't want, I don't want this to be a fair, you know, I don't know. I'll comment on that later. I don't want us to have a vision of fear, you know.
Comment on that, as one who sold a house on Pier Road, that sort of had an iconic look to it as far as the neighbors are concerned. But the existing laws allowed this couple to basically, well, essentially rip it down and build something that hardly fits into the definition of classic architecture.
Right.
You know.
unless you're an architecture student, maybe. So I think we've got a 9-year plan here with about 20 years' worth of legal work to achieve some of these, to move forward on some of these things. I'm no lawyer, but implementing design constraints, historic district rules and everything, that's a lot of work. And it's going to be a lot of resistance. So
Yeah.
I just want to
Yeah.
say that that's an example of the gentrification that was just mentioned. And it's right there in everybody's face on Cape Porpoise now, on the way to the pier. And it's really kind of, goes with the Bentley in the driveway.
Yeah.
Hey, Warner, I have a question on that. Is,
No Bentleys in town, got it.
Well,
It's your money, you can do what you want with it,
there's a place
right?
to start.
I know this is just one small point, but I thought if you had an undersized lot, which I assume that was, you had to conform to community architecture standards or something, one of the few standards we have
Sure,
in town.
yeah, yeah, and it's a pretty broad definition. You know, you're looking for something that, that has some New England architecture style to it, but also, the primary design features are ensuring that, majority of the roof is pitched, but it does allow, have some allowances in there where you could have portions of it that are flat, so that design, criteria was put in play primarily to deal with the beach.
Right.
So that, it was more a statement of, here's what not to design versus a very specific guideline of, here's exactly what to design. I mean, I'm familiar with, with the house that's, that's there on Pier Road, and I think, it's, within those definitions, it meets that definition. I know what has caused a lot of concern with folks has been the height, and, the height is really driven by floodplain regulations. That's why you have a house that's, that's of that height, so. I think if there's, the discussion around architectural design standards has come up, from what I understand, numerous times in town, with folks that are very passionate on both sides of that opinion, whether or not, there should be a design, review standard for, for homes that are in the public eye, and I can tell you, I know it's been debated in this town before, and
Sure.
and I know a lot of folks have experienced, they've seen and observed the experience of property owners in Kennebunk that have that, and my understanding is that they don't wish to go through that same level of scrutiny of, being told what color to paint their front door, and, material choices, and, and things of that nature, that they just, that they consider that intrusive, so, I think it's, it's obviously a question that, that comes forward. I do oftentimes, I get questions, folks will ask, wow, what's the design standard for, for the main, the Main Street area? I said, well, there isn't one. Because what we found is that, folks that buy in those areas buy for that exact reason. They buy for, they buy for the architecture. And, a lot of the work that we see that happens in there is very consistent, with the existing architecture, that's there. Again, I'm not a design student, and I'm sure somebody could crucify me on the proper trim styles and whatnot, that are supposed to be out there, but, but that's, that, I would say that's the impression that, that we have, is that, for the most part, what we've seen in terms of additions and renos, in those, streetscape areas has been done, fairly consistent with what's around it. I guess the question is, to what level, does the community want to go to?
Is it adequate the way it is, or does it?
Sure, and how much of a process and how much of, fact for, a design feature you want to produce, or how much you want to leave that up to, an opinion, and whether or not you want to have folks go through that type of process, so.
Let me ask a technical question then, associated with the state requirements. So if we put something in there that says we want to have, maintain the architecture of the town and so forth, but we don't put any land use ordinance in place to do that, is there any issue with the state?
The question is.
No, no, not at all. This chapter we're talking about right now tonight, this is just an aspiration. It doesn't say how we're gonna get there. That's further on. That's like, next month, a month after. You guys are gonna decide whether the comp plan's gonna include a recommendation. One recommendation was, well, we should have a historic district in order to achieve this goal. Or maybe you'll have a different recommendation, says maybe we shouldn't have a historic district, or we should have some other means to, keep the historic district, the old houses looking good. What I'm hearing, there's not much support in Kennebunkport historically for that, and, but that recommendation is something you guys are gonna vote up or down sometime in the next 3 months. You're either gonna put it in the plan or you won't, but tonight, this is not a recommendation. This is just kind of like it's like a motherhood and apple pie statement. It says, we like the way it looks. It's beautiful,
Right, well, I want to make sure that if we put something in there, this is what we want to look like, but we put nothing in the plan to get there. Is that an issue with?
No, not at all. In Charleston, South Carolina, they have very strict historic district regulations. Other towns in the United States, they kind of use peer pressure. Which is not regulatory at all. They keep their character by people kind of talking to neighbors you just do what works. So it's a different way to get there in different places.
Peer pressure a little harder when the neighbors here.
That's what fences are for. Put up a taller fence.
Well, those are just two examples, but it doesn't have to be coercive. It doesn't have to be regulatory. It's just saying, we realize we have a beautiful community with historic buildings. That's a good thing, They kind of use peer pressure.
We also want to make sure people can do with their homes, how they want to, if they like a box, they like a box. Not my cup of tea.
Let's not be overbearing.
One day, the 1970s split level will be historic architecture.
Wait a minute, the state's cutoff is 50 years, Werner. Well, what you're saying, 50 years is a cutoff.
Right?
It doesn't have to be coercive, it doesn't have to be regulatory. It's just saying, we realize we have a beautiful community with historic buildings. That's a good thing.
One day, the 1970s split level will be historic architecture.
I guess I'd like to add somewhere in here, we talk about climate change, but I'd like to be a little specific on sea level rise, because that's sort of the biggest threat, at least I perceive as the biggest threat to us as a coastal community. And hoping that will help also avoid some folks who are climate change deniers that, or don't feel that the science is right on that, but it's hard to argue with sea level's gone up. So let's talk about the facts.
Right.
Sea level has gone up, and this is what we need to do to protect against changes in the future. I'd like to add somewhere in here. And stay out of the politics of the piece.
So are you talking about in climate resilience?
Yeah, either in climate resilience
To
or,
put sea level in as a focus?
yeah, as a focus.
Yeah, we do have it in the infrastructure paragraph, saying, look, we recognize the sea's coming up, so we're gonna make sure our utilities are ready for it,
Yeah. Okay, yes, you do that, I missed that. Thank you.
And in the climate paragraph, Dan, there is a statement that says, we will adapt. So that's kind of neutral there, it doesn't say, sea's gonna do this or that. It says, whatever it does, we're gonna be ready for it.
Climate resilience,
Yeah, either in climate resilience
to put sea level in as a focus.
Yeah, we do have it in the infrastructure paragraph, saying, look, we recognize the sea's coming up, so we're gonna make sure our utilities are ready for it. And in the climate
In the
paragraph, Dan,
environmental protection paragraph, I would love to see that tied into clean swimming water. We don't, we talk about the impact on, you talk about replacing sewers and septics that are not
Right.
functioning, but we don't tie it directly to, a serious threat, which is,
Exactly, yeah. No, that's a
Our
good
beach.
point, Paul, yeah. I will make sure we get that in that paragraph.
Okay.
in the environmental protection paragraph, I would love to see that tied into clean swimming water. We don't, we talk about the impact on, we talk about replacing sewers and septics that are not
Right.
functioning, but we don't tie it directly to, a serious threat, which is
Exactly, yeah. No, that's a
Our
good
beach.
point, Paul.
Yeah, it's a good start.
I will make sure we get that in that
Thank you.
paragraph.
Really is.
I mean, I thought it was very thoughtful, very comprehensive. I would love to go live there one day. Neighbor of mine says she hopes she lives this long to be able to live in this town.
One thing, it's just a factual point, on the list of, the scenic vista pieces, Durrell's Bridge that's listed there that's a Kennebunk
not in
and a
Kennebunk,
Rundle
right.
Thought it was
feature,
very
so.
thoughtful.
Oh,
I know somebody
Yeah.
may put
so
that on the
somebody
list,
thinks
but
it's in town, but it's not?
It's not in,
Right.
it's not in the port.
All right, so we'll take that off the list?
One day. Neighbor of mine says she hopes she lives this long to.
it's a great spot, but we don't, we don't have much say over it.
It's not ours.
We had another question about the
One thing, it's just a
Second Congregational
on
Church.
the list of, the
First.
scenic vista pieces.
Okay, so there's the First Congregational Church, and then there's South Congregational Church.
Yes.
Okay, I think someone just wrote Second Congregational Church as in,
I know somebody
not
may
the,
put that on the list.
Not the
there's
other one.
another one?
Right. I see.
Okay, but
There
we
is a
weren't.
First Congregational Church.
Okay.
That's
so-
in Kennebunkport.
And then South Congregational
That's one of the
Church
oldest
is also-
churches
It's a great
around.
spot. We don't have much say over it.
Not ours.
Great, so we'll cross out the Second Congregational Church. Second Congregational Church.
Great.
First.
Any other questions on
Okay, so there's the First Congregational Church, and then
this at all for now?
No, it's great.
Did you guys compare this list
Okay,
with
I think someone just wrote
The last
the list
one.
in the last comprehensive plan on the scenic?
Okay, but
There
we
is a
weren't-
First.
Uh-huh,
Okay.
That's in Kennebunkport.
uh-huh.
And then South Congregational.
That's one
Thank
of the
you.
oldest churches around.
Great, so we'll cross out the Second Congregational.
We ticked all the boxes for the state plan? Did they have any specific things on vision you needed to address? Okay. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Did you guys compare
All right,
this
thank you
list
very
with,
much.
the list?
Any other discussion on this for now? So I suppose in 2 weeks we get together again and
Yep.
kind of go
Uh-huh.
through it and have some more feedback.
Uh-huh.
And then we can see how we
Thank you.
send it out to the townspeople for them to provide a little feedback on it as well. Okay, next on the agenda is the initial discussion on future land use chapter.
All right, I have a couple slides, if everyone's ready to dive into that, even though we're sort of still in vision mode. So I wanted to go through a couple items, some of the information that's required for Chapter 208, and just have an initial discussion on some of the maps that we'll be looking at in preparation for when we do meet, I think, with the planning board, which tentatively scheduled still
Tentatively for the 17th.
For the 17th,
Yep.
okay, just so we're kind of ready for that, because I think that it will be great to get the planning board's input on some of the items that this committee would like to discuss with regard to the future land use chapter. So On the slide here are some of the required analyses to be consistent with Chapter 208. First, and I'll just go through these pretty quickly. Does the future land use plan align and/or conflict with the community's vision statement? So, for example, if the vision statement said we want to really increase density in this area of town, then we'd want to make sure that the future land use chapter and associated maps sort of reflect that. Is the configuration of the growth areas shaped by natural opportunities and/or constraints? The location of public facilities, the transportation network. So we'll be looking at some critical and important natural resources, which you already have looked at while we've covered the natural resources chapter, the water resources chapter, the marine resources chapter. How does the future land use plan relate to recent development trends? Given current regulations, development trends, population projections, estimate how many new residential units, how much commercial or institutional or industrial development will likely occur in the planning period, that's over the next 10 years, and where is this development likely to go? So we'll kind of revisit some of the initial discussions that we had on some of the dimensional standards in the zoning ordinance. We talked about that during the sort of very early stages of the comprehensive plan when we went over our baseline review. So we'll pull up some of that information. There's also some of that is touched on in the existing land use chapter. And then how can critical natural resources and important natural resources be effectively protected from future development impacts? So here's just a quick overview of a proposed process for updating the growth areas. First, we'll look at mapping the critical natural resources and referencing some of the more detailed information in the other chapters. That's a criteria that needs to be fulfilled in the future land use chapter. We'll look at development trends and existing development. We'll review the current growth, transitional and rural areas, which I know the Growth Planning Committee just did, but there's an opportunity to just explore a little bit further and see if this comprehensive plan should be directing the growth areas or adding additional growth areas such as a critical waterfront area into the growth management map. Describe the growth district's relationship to the vision, constraints, and types and intensity of proposed uses. So we'll be talking about where commercial development is targeted, and to what extent, residential density, that sort of thing, in which areas of town. Identify anticipated major municipal capital investments needed to support proposed land uses. We'll review all of the information at a public workshop, potentially an open house that may help us accommodate larger numbers without everyone being all together. That's something that we can discuss further at upcoming meetings, and then refine the strategies that will be included in this chapter and other chapters. The minimum state policies are coordinating the community's land use strategies with other local and regional land use planning efforts, support location types, scales, intensities of land uses the community desires, support the level of financial commitment necessary to provide needed infrastructure in growth areas, establish efficient permitting procedures, especially in growth areas, protect critical rural and critical waterfront areas from the impacts of development. Strategies, including assigning implementation for the future land use plan to appropriate committees, boards, or a municipal official. This is something that Tom and I have said we feel strongly about including in your implementation for for strategies in your plan, and something that's required for this chapter specifically. Using the descriptions provided in the future land use plan narrative, to maintain, enact, or amend local ordinances, to satisfy a range of criteria and goals, such as the scale and intensity of future development, as I mentioned, different types of uses in different areas of the town. Establish the fair permitting procedures, define protective measures for natural resources, and then also the waterfront, critical waterfront areas, if those are proposed. Has the town had critical waterfront areas identified in the past, do you know, Warner, or anyone? As part of like a growth management area?
So, the growth maps that we have now is really the first version of the growth maps that the town has had.
Okay.
I mean, you have other areas that have been identified through zoning, primarily through shoreline zoning, resource protection identification in that fashion, but not through a growth area map.
Because I know that the 2012 version did have some smaller, quasi-transitional areas in between some of the three larger areas. I don't think, none of those were waterfront areas,
So,
but
the growth.
just curious if there was a iteration since the last comp plan that had.
You have
No.
other areas that have been identified.
Those are the two
through zoning,
changes we made
primarily through shoreline zoning,
to the original plan,
resource protection.
based on the infrastructure that was developed out in different
But
areas.
not through a growth area.
The recent
Otherwise,
changes.
that
Right.
was
Yeah.
the first growth plan or map that we had.
Right.
It's only been really modified twice.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Additional strategies are including, in the capital improvement program, anticipated municipal capital investments needed to support the proposed land uses, coordinating with neighboring communities, on the land use designation, so that you don't have, a growth area abutting, a rural area without some sort of buffer in between. Providing the code enforcement officer with tools, training, and support necessary to enforce land use regulations and ensure the code enforcement officer is certified in accordance with the state statute. Track new development in the community by type and location. Direct a minimum of 75% of new municipal growth-related capital investments into designated growth areas. And then, at least every 5 years, evaluate implementation of the plan.
So 75% of growth-related capital into the growth areas.
Yes.
Where does that number come from, Liz? Is that a state designation?
These are the minimum state
Okay.
strategies
Yep.
that need to
So they
be.
designate that if you're gonna have a growth area, that
Yeah.
they wanna see 75% of your
Correct.
capital infrastructure.
Yeah,
Well, capital you identified,
It says growth-related.
growth-related.
growth-related
Not
capital
all.
investment.
Growth related,
Right,
right.
so if you're replacing roads or bridges that are necessary, that's not a growth-related.
Right. But if you were to
So-
extend a sewer,
If you're
Sewer-
extending a
sewer
sewer or
extensions,
widening a
yeah.
road or,
okay.
I
And,
guess.
yeah, and we can
Yeah.
tease out whether there are, there's likely a specific definition of
Yeah, that was gonna be,
growth-related capital investments that I can look through their 208 requirements to see if we can nail down specifically what that, if that does include something specific.
Yeah,
yeah. No, that was my next question, was how was that
replacing
defined?
roads
Yeah,
or bridges
exactly.
that are
'Cause we haven't defined that.
necessary, that's not a growth-related.
So I put together a series of maps. I know they're a little bit small on the screen right now, just to get everyone warmed up to thinking about some of the information that we'll be looking at when we kind of dive into just opening up the growth management area map and thinking about whether there are any changes that need to be made. And then also thinking about if any of the strategies that come out of the comprehensive plan and the future land use chapter are directed towards potential zoning changes. So this is a combination of layers that are all merged into one sort of orange zone that shows what the critical natural resources are. And this is something that's defined by state statute. It's a host of different types of natural resources, vulnerable species, specific habitats, some wetlands, and the goal is to clearly explain in your future land use chapter if there are critical natural resources in areas that you're designated as growth areas, that there are also measures in place to protect those natural resources. So you can have an overlap between your critical natural resources and your growth areas, but you have to show how they're being protected. Here is a map that should look familiar to most folks. This is the growth areas. The green is your rural, yellow is transitional, and then the tan on the southern end is the growth area. I'm sure you can't read any of that, but I did include some information. We've looked at, there's tiny triangles that show the information that we have available through GIS on the growth management permits that have been issued over the last 10 years or so. So those are mapped. We have that mapped, I believe, in the existing land use chapter also. The black outlines show your zoning districts. So when we sort of dig into it a little bit more, we can see how those areas overlap. One of the points made in the 2012 comprehensive plan is that growth management areas would align with sewer and a 1,000-foot buffer from sewer. So here in pink with the 1,000-foot buffer and a somewhat transparent shade of pink is your sewer infrastructure. And it doesn't quite align with the growth management areas. So that's something that I think is worth taking a look at.
What's the 1,000-foot sewer? Does that mean potentially sewer would go to that area because it's close enough?
That's right. The thought process was is that if there were parcels that were, that had the potential to have sewer extended to it, it was those that were within 1,000 feet of existing infrastructure.
And we chose to leave the Goose Rocks, Cape Porpoise area outside of the growth area. It didn't make sense, so you're going to add that to the growth area just because there was sewer there. So we used 1,000 foot as the starting point, and obviously we looked at
Sewer, does that mean potentially sewer would go to
areas
that
of the
area?
town
Yeah,
where it made sense and where it
That's
didn't.
right. The thought process was is that if
Came up with
there
the
were
original
parcels that had the potential to have sewer extended to it, it was those that were within 1,000 feet of existing.
We'll also look at town-owned land, critical facilities in particular, but also town-owned lands. Some of the green zones are conservation land, but some of the parcels owned by town are, you can see the village parcel, some sites such as where we're currently sitting, town-owned land with municipal facilities. So looking at the distribution of some of these municipal facilities, fire, for instance, and where growth is directed, to ensure that emergency responders can get to the densely populated areas as well as the rural areas. And that if there, you know, if there were to be development encouraged in an area of town that is not currently well served by a fire station, that might be something that the plan would recommend an additional facility. Or, you know, mutual aid from an adjacent community. And then this is rough, this is not exact, because there are some nuances in the zoning ordinances as well as where non-residential development is permitted, but the majority of non-residential uses are permitted in the zoning districts that are shown on the screen in a color other than white. So it's the Riverfront, Dock Square, Farm and Forest, Free Enterprise, Cape Porpoise East, West, and Cape Porpoise Square. And they don't all permit the same types of non-residential uses or the same degree of non-residential uses, but currently that's where the bulk of non-residential uses are allowed in some fashion. That's all I have for maps right now. Just to give you an idea of what we're going to be diving into and some of the considerations that we'll look at when we think about if there are any changes that the committee would like to make to the growth management areas and potentially zoning amendments down the line.
Can you send those slides to us?
Yes.
Thanks.
Good question, Jim?
For maps right now.
I thought there was, but
So thank you for that. So our next step on this is, you guys gotta, what's our next step for the land use piece?
For land use, well, we're just starting
We're
that.
starting, yeah, I know, but I mean,
Can you send the slides?
the information provided tonight, what should we take with that and prepping for our next discussion?
That was a little preview of where we're going. Your immediate task will be vision,
Yeah,
which
okay.
we'll spend some time on in the next meeting, 2 weeks from tonight. They're both very important.
Tied together, for sure.
Yeah, the vision, it's critically important, but it's only 4 pages, so we'll be able to handle that pretty good.
But there is a tie to the land use ordinance.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll want to not finalize the vision chapter, but we'll want to get that in a fairly good place before we really proceed with the future land use chapter, because we do want the chapter to be consistent with the vision statement. But that being said, I think the feedback that we would be interested in hearing from all of you is to what extent you'd like to have, open up the table to looking at modifying the growth management areas. Because I know that's something that you sort of just updated. But it's, this is the opportunity to take a comprehensive look at those areas. And we want to walk you through that process if that's something that the committee is interested in exploring.
Yeah, I think the other question with that is what other purposes would you potentially use the map for, other than just determining allocation of growth permits for residential development? Because that's right now, that's what it's used for. It goes back to that question that says, all right, if you're going to have a growth cap in town, then you need to designate, these types of areas.
Yeah, so that's what drove them,
Right.
right? And to give that some consistency between the plan and our growth
I think
permits.
the other question with that is
But we've also now have some
what
other
other
criteria,
purposes
which
would you
maybe
potentially
wasn't
use the
there in
map for,
2012.
other than just determining
For instance, the
allocation
capital
of
accelerated
that's
capital
right now,
being
that's
spent
really
towards that area.
that's what
I don't
it's
recall
used
hearing
for.
that as part of any
You know,
discussion.
it goes
No,
back to that
that's-
question,
that's
you know,
new
that question
language.
That's new
says,
language.
Yeah,
all right,
that's
if
new
we're gonna
language
have
So I
in
think
there.
it makes
growth
sense to
cap
maybe
in
take a
town,
look at
you
this
need to
because,
designate, you know, you need to designate
if we
these
do
types
have
of
that kind of
areas.
capital, 75% could be a big number, depending on the size of, what we're dealing with. It could be a small number, it could be $500,000 if it's,
Yeah, well, it's a question of, and I pulled up the definition of it, and so I think it is something just to be aware of. And another thing to think about of saying, okay, so these types of things, picturing and envisioning them in that area, and if just, and letting that kind of help be one of the criteria in the guide and saying, okay, does this still make sense for this boundary of the growth area? Or does it want to be modified? So it winds up being defined as, so municipal growth-related capital investment is investment by the municipality in the following projects. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Even if privately owned, using municipal, county, state, federal, or other public funds in the form of a purchase, lease, grant, loan guarantee, credit, tax credit, or other federal assistance. So it's a little bit tricky because you've got, you have public projects, but you also potentially have private projects that could be utilizing, state, local, federal, or tax credits. So, and so then the categories are construction of new transportation infrastructure or capacity. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. That's, sewer extensions. Construction or acquisition of newly constructed multifamily rental or affordable housing. Development of industrial or business parks. Construction or extension of sewer, water, or other utility lines. Construction of public, quasi-public, or private service infrastructure facilities and community buildings, or construction or expansion of municipal office buildings, municipal educational facilities, and other quasi-public facilities and other civic buildings that serve the public. So there's a lot, there's a lot in that. And I think that can be a little bit tricky, especially whenever it's one thing, managing, well, we'll just have to keep that in mind as we kind of envision what those uses could be,
what kind of private organizations within our town
or
have that? In other words, conservation trust, would they somehow fall into that? If they're getting-
buildings.
do they
Probably
get
more
far-
likely someone has a housing project and they want to use some kind of tax incremental
That's right.
financing or,
Yes.
or federal money or,
Right. So yeah, and I think that's a good prime example of what that could look like if you were doing, the development of affordable housing and you were using tax credits. That's, something that would fall into that, would fall into that category. I mean, could the Conservation Trust fall into that?
probably more likely someone has a
Possibly,
housing
but
project,
more so if they were,
some kind of,
if there was a facility, that was being constructed that was utilizing, funds. So I think that's a less likely scenario. I think
Is it possible, I don't know if that would fall on your shoulders or not, to kind of digest that and give us some examples of how that's gonna apply to us so we can kind of, wrap our brains around it a little bit more, around the scenarios, if it is something that's implemented, what other, guidelines or
Right.
regulations are being imposed down the road if we do accept that kind of, change.
Yeah.
What it means long-term, short-term.
I mean, I think the municipal side of it is a little bit easier.
Yeah.
That's a little bit easier to manage and point out, because that's, you're saying, all right, if we, as a town, accept, state, federal, or other public funds, and, that's bonds or, tax funds, and we're constructing new infrastructure, really what this is saying is like, well, you should be doing that in your growth area. That's really all that, that's saying. If you're utilizing public funds and you're extending, infrastructure, not replacing it, but extending it, then it needs to be happening in, 75% of that is happening in your designated happening in your designated growth area.
If we were to do something
As a town,
like
accept,
down the pier, which isn't in
state,
the
federal, or other public
and
funds,
did some type of
that's,
extension there, that costs a lot
that's
of money.
bonds or,
We would have to come up
tax,
with
tax funds.
more funds.
And we're
to
constructing
direct
new
towards the growth area.
infrastructure, really
that
what
would be
this is
growth
saying
related.
is like, well. Yeah, that wouldn't be
Well,
growth.
it could be
yeah.
growth related.
Well, it could be growth related really efficient. We want to
Right.
extend the pier. or
Right.
something like that, So
Utilizing
we'll have to
public
really
funds
watch that.
in your
But you could also, I can see like a lot of
not
rails to
replacing it,
trails
extending it, then it
projects
needs to be happening.
have been funded through,
75% of that
you
is
know,
happening in
certain
your designated
federal slots of money. So you could see, you know, even the trust, you know, I know they've been after some, you know, if they were able to do something and get some federal money, or like how Timber Island was bought with, you know, a combination of state and federal money to, so potentially you could have
Yeah.
transportation related.
I mean, I think the point there, though, is that,
Also, I can see like a lot of
it's as much about what it says as much as it is about what it doesn't say.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, so by and large, I think activities of the Conservation Trust are gonna fall into a different category that isn't mentioned here.
Yeah, I was thinking rails to trails, because there are always transportation dollars that have been.
True, yeah, and I think you just wanna make sure that, rails to trails doesn't fall, and I don't think that it would be, I mean, my first kind of read of this is that that wouldn't be considered transportation infrastructure, even though the money might come from, might come through a DOT source or something like that.
Who makes that determination? Us, the town? Whether we say it's growth related
Well,
investment?
that's a good question, but I don't know that anyone from the state's going to be really checking in on the town, I think. I think that
That's a good point.
the intent is that, that's the strategy that the town is working towards implemented. And I would say as far as trust investment, that's likely to fall within the category of open space preservation and rural development more than growth management. So I would probably say that it does not fall in a capital investment
Well,
category.
that list is a good sounding board anyway, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it gives you a good, clear intent of saying, hey, if you're getting, transportation funds,
Yeah.
this is where you need to be spending them.
Right,
Yeah.
And I think that bodes, in terms of doing grant applications and things like that, having that type of language in there just helps support that. But as far as like, is there an auditor that's going to come in and like pull the comp plan up and take a look at that? I think that's more those, that's gonna fall more on the responsibility of those, firms, that are providing the funding. And if there's sometimes those programs have an audit process as part of that, but, I don't think it's anything that, at this level, we need to be concerned with.
I was thinking more in the inverse. If we spent $1 million in a non-growth area, we're gonna have to come up with $3 million to spend in the growth area. Where, may not be really anticipating that, so you want to make sure.
Right. I
we
mean,
really dot our i's and cross the t's.
it does, it does clearly exempt out, the repairs to existing.
Right.
And also, it does give a little, if you read further on, it gives an escape clause for minor expansions, so, of course,
We'll use the escape.
define minor versus major, but,
Less than half.
yeah.
Okay. Good.
So if I could just add on to what we're looking, I think, from the committee a little bit is we're also going to be talking about or reaffirming what types of uses and the intensity of the uses in different areas. And I think that's a conversation that will happen alongside looking at where the growth areas are designated, because it's helpful if your zoning ordinance is in line with your growth management areas to sort of
Yeah, I agree with you.
foster
Yeah.
how those two pieces work together. So
I agree.
that's a broader conversation, and definitely something that is a great discussion to have with the public. What types of uses and where.
Right.
Yeah, it's, I think that's been, a discussion that's been had before, but, there hasn't really been a huge desire to really jump into that, but I think it's worth bringing up again is, you look at your table of uses and say, huh, all right, like, do we want warehouse facilities in town?
Right.
And if we do want warehouse, and I'm just picking that as an example, where do we want them? If we want them at all, or is there a, size and scale that really needs to be, or, no, we don't object to warehouses, but we want, to manage the size and scale of them, for that matter. I mean, the reality of it is that the market really is supported residential development here in town versus, industrial and commercial. The saving grace of not being super close to Route 1 or 95, but.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's important, what you're saying, and I don't know if it's, we methodically think about all the examples, and then, I think of like, we talk about a trail, it does, or what you're saying, a warehouse, but what's the impact of the current use, or does it limit, what we're changing, does it limit, like, if we're gonna impose, say, a walking trail, do we consider, are we gonna allow everything? Hunting, for example, or other things, I wanna make sure that we have those examples in place where we're not taking away the ability to do something in favor of something else, so.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those activities, though, don't rise to the level of being, spelled out in a zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
But,
It's,
But it's a
that's what
valid
we're here
discuss-
for, so we don't miss
it's a
it.
valid
you know,
discussion.
and-
Yeah.
Good point, Jim. That's why they call it a comprehensive plan. So you don't miss anything.
That's right.
So from a timing standpoint, we're gonna talk about the vision next time. But we also may be having the same day for the meeting.
Yes, so I'll have that discussion, with planning board, tomorrow evening, I brought up at the last meeting, but we'll get a better confirmation out of them for the 17th.
And then we're looking at a workshop sometime in
Yes,
September, right?
Yeah, I was just about to speak to that. Absolutely, it's coming up soon, so we gotta start thinking about planning for that. I mean, Liz and I know what kind of material, presentation, questions we'll bring into it, but what's kind of beyond our control is venue.
Yes, so I'll have that
I thought,
discussion.
we had a fabulous session last week, that couldn't have been better, but
Yeah.
I brought up
we've got to start thinking about, okay, so where's this going to be? Is it going to be inside, outside? Obviously, if we do it in September, the weather will probably be still okay for outside, you don't have to wear a mask.
Mhm.
And if that's not the case, we're going to find a venue that's indoors where everybody will wear a wet mask, but it'll have to be a big enough room to accommodate everybody.
Right. We're looking for it to be roughly the same size as the last event? Is that the idea? Or
Well,
bigger?
yeah, except that what Jim was saying was, the townspeople are starting to hear that we're doing good stuff here, and there's more of them want to join the party,
Right.
Yeah, I think again, all I said I was gonna pass it on,
Yeah.
People got valid points where,
So-
just gotta take that into consideration,
Yeah.
like, to have a bigger venue, or have the ability to make people flow. I don't know if that makes more sense to, I don't know if we do
Smaller
something.
venue, but multiple times or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, we gotta give that some thought, because September's gonna be here pretty soon.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
We'll have our 2 meetings, and then we'll be in September before we
Yeah.
really chat about it.
Another event that hasn't come up lately, but you may recall 2 years ago when Liz and I submitted a proposal to the town, we had yet another event on our list, and I'm just going to throw it out there tonight to see if it's something you're interested in pursuing. And that is, we proposed to show a film, Paris to Pittsburgh. It's about renewable energy, and it's kind of an optimistic film in my estimation. Basically, the basic theme is, particularly the younger generation says, we've got some big challenges here, but we can do it, But it's a film that I had a part in showing publicly in Portsmouth 2 or 3 years ago, and was well received. So it's the theme of the film fits right in with the comprehensive plan. But if that's something you want to pursue, we actually have a copy of the film.
Okay.
You know, that's the easy part, but once again, we have to think about the venue. Where would you show a film? One thought I had was, this time of year, you might be able to show it outdoors. Particularly the younger generation says, we've got some big challenges here, but we can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say, just, and I'm just talking out loud, logistically, it's a little tricky to try to, figure something into September, where we're at the beginning of August. But, I think, the venues that come to mind would be having a discussion with the school. Would be talking to Consolidated.
Is that something that I could air through our channel here? Would that, I could download it into the town
Yeah.
thing, and I can play it at designated times?
Yeah, I think one of the things we'd want to know, just, I don't know what kind of license arrangements
Yeah.
are needed.
I need to know.
Yeah, and that's something I'd have to inquire about.
Yeah,
I have a DVD, but I have to go check in with the producers to make sure that it's, showing in conjunction with the comprehensive plan, that's going to be no problem.
that's right, that's one thing, but yeah, you throw it out there on the air and you rebroadcast it, that's a whole other animal.
Yeah, all right.
We don't want to be doing the movies from the courthouse with you.
Right.
Just so you can show.
Have the FCC police come down and haunt us.
Tops. I'll be, 2 weeks, I'll be back.
Need a bucket person.
As long as you have the producers, okay, that's half the battle right there.
Oh, yeah, and I'm sure I'll be able to get it for public showing in support of the comp plan. I have a DVD, but it's basically what we did in Portsmouth. It wasn't a comp plan, but it was for a public purpose. Showing in conjunction with the comprehensive plan. Nobody was making money off it.
That's one thing, but yeah, you throw it out there on the air and you
I think it's a nice idea.
Chris?
Comment?
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
Is there a date that when the vision statement is no longer in draft?
Well, you're leading me right into my next point. It was on do we need to have that vision statement sort of formalized for the workshop?
And I'm sure I'll be able to get it for public
Would
showing
have to be,
in support of the comp plan.
to get the value out of the workshop, to have that vision statement say, okay, this is what it is.
Yes, yeah, you really do, Dan, and the vision statement is, what do we aspire to be in 10 years or 9 years from now? The rest of the plan is how we're gonna get there, including the future land use.
Right.
If you say something in your vision, we'd love to have like, a shopping center over there, well then, future land use has to kind of get in a little more detail, okay, how are we gonna do that,
So are there kind of deadlines at this point that you're shooting for to have certain deliverables or?
Yeah.
The drop dead deadline is, the comp plan has to be approved by town meeting next year.
Next June,
Yeah.
yeah. What that really means, we gotta have the plan done and presented to the selectmen in February. Right, this is what we want to put on the warrant, so start backing things up, we could use that extra 3 or 4 months this year. So we'd have to get this vision statement really nailed down by really our first meeting in September, I would think.
Yeah,
That coming out of there, we're done.
yeah.
So that means next week, or in 2 weeks, we need to have
drop
all
dead
our
deadline
comments
is,
in, right? And then we
yeah.
want to give everyone in the town at least an opportunity to look at it.
Mhm.
And then we look at what feedback we get, and we make any adjustments we need to make, and then it's set.
Mhm.
So we really
Yeah.
have to set at that first meeting in September.
Yeah.
Because then the second meeting will end up formalizing, and we're probably targeting the workshop for sometime late September, I would
Mhm.
expect.
Mhm.
Okay. I just don't know where we could fit the film piece in within all that.
Yeah, I would think the film would have to come,
To come-
afterwards, like in October, November, just as a,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then
Throw
we
in.
We can do an internal, like the consolidated school, and get past
Yeah.
this COVID stuff.
Right, yeah. Well, last I heard, they anticipating Delta's gonna peak around October.
So
Yeah.
it could be something, is it gonna, be nice to have that before we finalize things.
Yeah.
It
I-
may be
you
difficult to do.
Last
Maybe
last
difficult.
week, I thought it was so great being outdoors,
Right.
everybody was relaxed,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
that's why I kind of have a vision of watching
I would
a
think
movie out in
that
front of the rec center, and,
after
this time of year, it's starting to get dark sooner.
Yeah.
throw in.
All right, let's, think about that and maybe thoughts on next meeting. Maybe some thoughts on what we should do or not pursue. Any other questions, discussion on the future land use piece from the board?
I guess I had one question. What would the format of the land use workshop be? Would it be similar to a SWAT in that it's tables, interactive, or is it more of the group sitting and sort of discussion with speakers and/or committee interacting with the audience in a more traditional sense?
Well,
I'm just wondering for the facility that we need to secure.
Yeah, I think it depends a little if we're going to try to do it inside. There's definitely, it's easier to use slides and present material at the meeting. I think that often that's not the most fun and engaging way for people to participate either. So one thing we did talk about, I think early on, was having more of an open house style to give people the opportunity to come and look at some large maps. And if we do have to accommodate COVID, which we will in some fashion or another, that might be a way that we can have people shuffle through over a set period of time and have the chance to have some, one-on-one discussions, Q&A, and get some input on what the public is interested in terms of types of uses throughout town. When we come to reviewing the strategies, which is another key piece of this, I think that will most likely occur in the growth planning committee meetings. So when the public does want to weigh in on those strategies, they'll be available in draft form online, but it will require, either reaching out to the growth planning committee and providing input or coming to a meeting and providing input, because I think that probably is the easiest way to go through strategies. Tom, I don't know if you want to add to that or?
Yeah,
So
I mean,
would
I think
venue
if,
like this work? I mean, 'cause
Right.
got the North Park, got parking space, if it's a nice day, we can set some stuff up outside. I'm not sure we can arrange for a tent or something small, but,
When the public does want to weigh in on those
and certainly
strategies,
they've got this room
they'll be
available.
available in draft form online, but
And if we needed more space, we could talk to the chief about potentially using the bay.
either reaching out to
65
the
people.
growth planning
65,
committee and providing
69?
yeah, so, I mean,
That's not bad.
that's a good, point. If we're doing like a walkthrough venue, then, I mean, then this works here.
Right.
If you're doing, hey, between, whatever day and between this time and this time, and you have folks kind of filter through, then, this location would work. I'll tell you right now, trying to find tents, certainly not in a month's time frame is not gonna happen.
Cool.
Even just from the standpoint of availability, not to
Yeah.
mention budget, so.
I mean, we had talked about, the only other possibility it seems on the 10th is to call the trust and see if they have a weekend wedding and see if there's a Monday night following, they could leave the tent up. Now, usually their guests bring the tent in.
That's right,
It's not like,
yeah.
it's
It's a little
not
bit
like
of a-
Mount Anson.
Yeah, a little bit of a different
So
scenario there.
there could be an increase in cost for another day, but, just to not have it taken down, but that would be, it would seem we'd have to go to, if we wanted a larger venue, it would have to be consolidated or a tent. The nice thing about consolidated is you have a lot more room to spread out
Mhm.
than being
Right.
packed to here.
You
If
could
get-
use
If you get
multiple
75
rooms.
people here, it would be, with COVID, it would be very uncomfortable.
I think this room might be too small. If you have, if you're able to use the school, there are several, you have the big gym, and then there's the other smaller room in the front where we had the overflow for the town meeting. And you could also use, if it's a good day, you could also have activities outside, so you just have so much more flexibility.
It's flexibility out of the way too.
Either
I
way.
like your idea with the open house. I mean, if we define open houses,
The nice thing about consolidated.
throw it out,
a lot more room to spread out.
same registration, we get 200 people, and our registration is 50, we could, this is, well, depending on how long you say you need, if it's 45 minutes, okay, your slot is here, 45 minutes, come in, give them the opportunity to see the maps, even give feedback, ideas, and you're out the back door, and here's it. It's longer, but we satisfy the need of, people that want to be involved and want to be able to come without getting cut off, per se, So, a couple options, but depends on all the
We'll figure it out.
imposing,
Yeah.
I do just think, I think we're a little tight on time for September event, you know, given that we're in August, you know, and the number of meetings that we have to figure it out.
If we push that into October, what's that do to your guys' schedule for delivering?
We can do that, but it's less likely to be outdoors.
Yeah.
Right.
We have what?
Less likely to be outdoors.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Any piece of it outdoors. But I think we could make this work, and it's got a lot more control over this than the school piece.
I do just think, I think we're a
We'd love
little
to
tight on
achieve
time
that
for
today.
Yeah, and I mean, having a flow through, you know, having a flow through here then gets rid of having to deal with time slots and having, you know, the occupancy limits.
You still may wanna do time slots, just so, I mean, you don't have 100 people show up at the same time. Kind of, have 25
Yeah.
people at a time. How much time do you think they would need to kind of do?
I mean, it really depends on how many issues we end up wanting the feedback on, so, I mean, we wouldn't plan for more
Yeah,
than
and I mean, having
a
a flow through,
3-hour
having
workshop,
a flow
you know,
through here then
what we
gets
had
rid of having to
originally
have,
envisioned.
time slots and
So to
having,
translate that into an open house, I would, you know, it's really gonna depend on where we go with the future land use chapter and what areas need the most input, I think. And we can just tailor the activity based on that.
I think if we define it clearly,
I mean, it really depends
like
on
you
how
said,
many
and
issues the
people
committee-
know that they have a
how many
certain
issues
time
we
slot
end
to
up wanting
to digest it,
So,
but to also give the feedback, and of course, you guys are great at figuring out ways, you know, like you did with the chart, in order to capture information, you know, to get their feedback, and, you know, they know there's a hard stop, and,
It's really
you
gonna
know,
depend on
it should
where
work
we
with
go
a
with the future land use chapter and what areas.
10-minute, you know, lights flickering and you're out, and, you know, the next people have the time to come in, you know, but.
May I ask what kind of feedback, how many people responded to the surveys?
You may ask that. A different number responded to each of the surveys, and I can't think of the numbers off the top of my head. Some were over 100, a couple were under 100.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it was around about 100, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
89 to 100.
No, I'd say that was average, 100 people responded. We actually thought that was decent for an online survey that went out through listservs. It's a decent number, I think.
I was just thinking
May
that
ask
they
that.
could
A different number
how many people might turn out.
responded to each
We
of
certainly
the
know people,
surveys,
some of the
and I
people came to the workshop, the last
can't
one we
think of the
did,
numbers
were
off the
very
top of my head.
enthusiastic and
Some
other
were,
people, so
over
might very well get a better response.
Yep, yeah, and I think we could probably assume maybe 75 to 100 people,
Yeah.
plus, based on the interest in the first workshop.
Dan, I apologize, I have an emergency work
Okay.
thing. I thank you very much, I have to leave, and appreciate it, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Jim. So if we had over like a 3-hour period, and we had 30-plus people kind of coming through on an hourly, hour slots, would that sort of work? Or is, we really need to have people sort of committed to a 3-hour time?
Question is, how many people you want, if it's indoors, if it's in this room, you know, what's the maximum number of people you want to see at one time?
And I apologize, I
Well, you could fit almost 70 in here. so-
Yeah, but that's pre-COVID.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think we ought to come in and just rip the masks off.
No, I mean, we got here, you know, I would say 20 or something like that,
Yeah.
25 max.
So we'll just do the math, you know?
Yeah. But we could also.
That's why I think the school would be better.
School,
Me
if we
too.
can
Right.
get it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I
You
mean,
could even use
ideally,
classrooms and
right,
just,
I-
you know,
ideally, well,
25 people.
and you also, I mean, the RSU has to be willing to,
Yeah,
you know, to allow for
Offer
that.
it,
I think the
right.
gym is a relative easy ask, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Anything going beyond that,
Hmm.
I wouldn't
yeah, but
Yeah.
that's pre-COVID.
necessarily plan on that.
Yeah.
Might be a little invasive if you stay in one part of the school, they can, you know.
100%, yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah, they
it's-
don't want us.
It's a nicer ask.
Yeah, they don't want us wandering all over the place.
So who's friends with the RSU? Who's going to make the ask?
Werner is. That's why I think the school.
He knows that.
I will check with the RS.
Otherwise, we're taking him out of the comp plan, keeping that elementary school. Janet, you had a question?
You can explain to them how we have a vision pertaining to school.
Yeah. Anything going beyond that?
Might be a
Well, that's the whole, that's
Yeah,
kind of the
that-
point of
you're right.
sticking to the gym, you know, becomes less of an issue for them, you know, in terms of, you know, cleaning protocols or
It's
anything
contained,
like
it's
that.
only one area to clean.
Werner.
Yeah. That's a question we would have to ask them,
Right.
because they may not want to have to deal with that. And that would be understandable why.
Keeping that
Yeah.
So
elementary school.
I think, this still
Janet,
could
you
be
had a question?
backup.
Well, and that's what's tricky, trying to navigate this, especially right now.
It's
You know,
a-
it's,
It is.
Moving
Very-
target.
I mean, I know, for
Transitional
example, they're not even, you know, allowing parents into the, you know, school for open houses, you know,
Right.
Right.
right now, so.
The weather has
Is
not
there a
been
way-
cooperating for any outdoor activities this summer either. That's why it's, you
Yeah, we
really
got-
have to have a safe
we got pretty
indoor
lucky.
alternative if you know, you think you can do it outside, but it doesn't always work. A lot of canceled activities.
All right, so yeah, so I'll reach out to the RSU, you know, just kind of get some, you know, take that temperature about, you know, September, October. Now, are we thinking, you know, are we thinking that this wants to be an evening event, or are we thinking that this is a, you know, during, like, evening, during the work week, or are we thinking of, like, this is a Saturday type event?
What are you guys thinking?
Why don't we look at our, revisit the survey responses where we asked people
When they
what-
would attend.
when they would
Sure.
attend?
Yep.
'Cause
No, that's a
I-
good
And I
point.
don't remember them off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But we
Okay.
can check back on that and tentatively plan for in-person flow-through activity. And then if things take a turn for the worse, then we'll look at what we can do with Zoom
Okay.
Yeah, that should be all right.
and just
Okay.
work under that assumption.
It's gonna be a Saturday if it's a school.
Right,
Just because they're trying to get things cleaned up.
yeah.
Why don't we look at our, revisit the
Yep.
survey responses where we asked people
Okay.
when they would attend?
That's good
I
discussion.
don't remember them off the top of my
All
head.
right, so,
Check back on that.
any other discussions on that piece? All right.
Nope, thanks.
Next is review of minutes for July 20th.
And if things take a turn for the worse.
Move they be accepted.
What we can do with
Is there a second?
That would be me?
Okay. Any discussion on it? All in favor?
Nope. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Paul, I didn't see your hand.
It's there.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet.
Yeah.
All right, so next steps, next meeting is 17th. It'll be a joint meeting. We gotta have questions for you, if anything, or changes we wanna make to the vision statement from the
Right.
committee. And then we'll figure out how we get some feedback from the town,
Okay.
so that then we can then firm that up on our meeting, first meeting in September. So we can start, we'll have that
That
as
would
a
be me.
basis for the workshop. Any other next steps we gotta do?
It's there.
I think so.
I just have one question, Werner. If you are able to provide us with a little bit of information on what the planning board might be most interested in talking about, you know, we'll plan for a future land use sort of related discussion, you know, along with the vision discussion. But if there's anything that they're particularly interested in or you think we should discuss with them, then we'd want to take the
Yep.
opportunity
Okay.
to do that, too. That'd be great.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Fitzgerald, I think
Just
you're
have
up.
one question, Werner. If you are able to provide
Anything
us
else to
with,
discuss?
a little
Hearing
bit of
none,
information on what the planning
I
board
move
might
that we
be
adjourn the
interested
meeting.
in talking about,
I'll second.
All in favor?
you know, we'll
Aye.
Aye.
plan for
Thank you very much.
future
Thank you for
land use
attending.
sort of related discussion, you know, along with the vision discussion. But if there's anything that they're particularly interested in or you think we should discuss with them, then